Before dawn touches the sky, a faint speck of light appears, quietly moving through the vast expanse. Astronomers call it 3I Atlas, the third interstellar visitor to pass through the solar system after Oumuamua and Borisov. But this time, something feels different. Its orbit is not just a harmless curve, but resembles a maneuver calculated in advance. A question echoes. Is this merely a wandering fragment of ice and rock? Or is it a deliberate project sent to test humanity? Throughout history, we have looked to the sky for answers. The Sumerians, the Maya, the ancient Egyptians, all left traces of their observations of unusual stars. Now, it is our turn. But the difference is, we have modern telescopes, digital data, and also the unease that 3I Atlas may not simply be passing by, but could actually be doing something with Mars right now. On this journey, you and I will dig deep, moving from serious science to bold hypotheses, from the silence of the cosmos to humanity's choices for survival. If you want to continue lifting the veil of this mystery with me, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about what you're most curious about. That helps us keep this conversation spreading further. You and I are both used to hearing news about comets, meteors, and chunks of space rock that sweep through the solar system. Most of them pass by and vanish, leaving nothing behind but a few articles and a little curiosity. But 3I Atlas is not like that. When it was first detected in July 2025, data from an automated telescope in Chile showed this was an object coming from beyond the solar system. In other words, an interstellar visitor. That alone is remarkable, because throughout recorded observation history, humanity has only documented two such visitors, Oumuamua in 2017 and Borisov in 2019. What makes 3I Atlas different is not merely its appearance, but the way it appears. Its orbit shows an approach toward Mars, and then a strange arc around the Sun. Instead of departing at escape velocity, it seems to have a slightly reduced speed, as if calculating. If you and I heard this in a science fiction movie, we would likely take it as a clue to hidden technology. But this is real data, from real telescopes, and it made the astronomical community stop and ask, is this simply a coincidence, or is it a premeditated plan? I want to pause here to explain a bit, so we can picture it together. An object arriving from interstellar space can be likened to a car that accidentally enters a crowded highway lane. In most cases, it will travel roughly straight, barely deflected by the gravity of small planets like Earth or Mars. Yet Atlas appears to have chosen an orbit that brings it near Mars, the place scientists are watching most closely. You might ask, is there a simpler explanation? Yes. Scientists have hypothesized that a combination of Jupiter's gravity and its original trajectory could have produced that odd shape. But that hypothesis is only provisional, because even when forced into mathematical models, Atlas still retains mismatched traces, small oscillations, speed changes that should not be there. This is when your and my imagination begin to intrude. What if this is not merely a lump of ice and rock passing by, but an artificial object in disguise? Imagine an extraterrestrial civilization sophisticated enough to design a spacecraft that looks no different from an ordinary comet. As it moves, we observe and think, that's just rock and ice. But inside, there might be a control system, a kind of engine we have never conceived. If you find this far-fetched, recall that humanity itself once tested similar ideas. In the 1970s, NASA sent the Pioneer and Voyager probes, small but capable of crossing the solar system. If some civilization observed them, they might mistake them for harmless metallic meteorites. Thus, the idea of disguising a craft as a natural object is not absurd. It only requires technology far beyond what we currently possess. This brings us to a larger question. Why Mars? Why doesn't Atlas approach Earth, where life is obvious, but instead swing by the dry red planet? Perhaps you're thinking as I am. Mars has long been the object of migration dreams. It's relatively close, has a thin atmosphere, and shows evidence of water in the past. A civilization interested in testing or preparing new living environments would find Mars attractive. And now, we see an interstellar object that appears to be interacting directly with it. From here, I want to offer you a personal reflection. In science, data can sometimes be interpreted in many ways, but our minds often prefer stories. Atlas might simply be rock, but we humans cannot stand silence. We weave, speculate, and sometimes that speculation opens new avenues of research. Just as when Galileo first looked through a telescope, he did not merely see bright points. He saw the possibility that the universe was far larger than imagined. Atlas thereby becomes a mirror reflecting our own curiosity. It might be natural, or it might be artificial. But certainly it has forced humanity to ask again, do we really understand the sky we are looking at? As this short section closes, I want you to hold that question in your mind. In the next part, we will dig deeper into the possibility that Atlas is not merely passing through, but is doing something to Mars, and why that possibility makes scientists both worried and unable to look away. Try to imagine with me, if Atlas truly is not merely a lump of ice and rock, but has a clear purpose, then Mars might be the very target it aims for. What we know so far shows the red planet is not entirely dead. Beneath its parched surface, there are still pockets of ice that could contain water. Its atmosphere, though thin and toxic to us, still provides a basis for conducting transformation experiments. And if some civilization wanted to attempt terraforming, that is, altering a planet's environment to make it more Earth-like, Mars is the most reasonable candidate in the solar system. I know that for you and me, the concept of terraforming sounds remote, but remember, right here on Earth, you have already done something similar, albeit unintentionally. When humans emit greenhouse gases, we accidentally warm the atmosphere, change ecosystems, and cause ice to melt at the poles. If a species had much higher technology, they could perform that process deliberately, pumping gases into Mars's sky, seeding microbes to create oxygen, or even using an object like Atlas as a planetary-scale seed device. Strangely, Atlas's orbit seems well suited for it to interact with Mars, rather than merely skim past. Some observers also suggest that its slight deceleration creates opportunities for controlled effects, such as releasing chemicals when it nears the red planet. It sounds like science fiction, but try to view this from the perspective of a civilization millions of years old. Might they use tools like that to spread life? One undeniable truth: Mars has long haunted our imagination. The Romans named it for the god of war. Early 20th century novels imagined canals and mysterious red civilizations. Now space agencies want to send humans to live there experimentally. So when Atlas, a stranger from beyond the solar system, chooses to visit this place, might we be witnessing part of a program far older, far larger, and beyond our imagination? Personally, I think this coincidence is what prevents us from ignoring it. If Atlas flew past Saturn or Neptune, it might just be a pretty point of light in a telescope. But its approach toward Mars, the planet humans have long hoped could be a second home, opens a larger question. Are we merely latecomers to a plan prepared long ago? I want you to relate this to human history. When Columbus reached the Americas, he thought he had found a new route to India. In reality, he collided with a world that already had civilizations, laws, and ecosystems of its own. Could Atlas be a Columbus ship from another civilization, visiting Mars with an aim we do not yet comprehend? Here, the educational principle intervenes. Science teaches us to seek the simplest explanation first. That is Occam's razor. When there are many hypotheses, the least complex is often true. By that blade, Atlas is just an odd chunk of ice and rock. But sometimes history shows that the crazy hypothesis opens up turning points. Who would have thought invisible bacteria could sicken humanity? Who would have believed a tiny electron could carry an entire modern industry? You and I, when we look at Atlas, have the right to ask, might what we consider too complex today become tomorrow's obvious truth? And there's one more point. Mars is not only a scientific destination, it is also a mirror for humanity's future. If Atlas truly carries a technology or a program, then it is not only transforming Mars, it is also testing us. Do we have the intellect and unity to recognize, understand, and respond to a trial coming from beyond? In this moment, Atlas is both an astronomical puzzle and a philosophical question. It places before you and me a choice. Will we regard it simply as a distant chunk of ice and rock, or as a signal of a larger cosmic plan? As this small section ends, I want you to keep this thought. Sometimes the universe does not send messages in words, but through actions and phenomena. And Atlas, with its orbit toward Mars, might well be such a message. In the next part, we will together dive deeper. If Atlas truly is a deliberate project, then who is behind it? And why choose this moment, when humanity is just mature enough to notice but not yet strong enough to control? Have you ever noticed that every major leap in human science often arrives at just the right moment, as if someone had arranged it in advance? When we first learned to calculate with crude tools, celestial mathematics suddenly appeared, helping our ancestors predict seasons, eclipses, and lunar phases. When the telescope was newly invented, Halley's comet reappeared, proving that celestial orbits could indeed be calculated. The question is, were those leaps truly achieved entirely by humans, or was there an invisible hand guiding the way? If you recall, the 3I Atlas scenario mentioned the hypothesis that celestial mathematics might have been implanted into humanity very early on. In other words, perhaps some intelligence distributed fragments of mathematical tools, giving them to different civilizations so they could do their part in a network of cosmic observation. The Babylonians with their star tables, the Maya with their calendars, the Chinese with classical astronomy, all as if fitted into a jigsaw puzzle whose full picture only someone holds. This sounds fanciful, but consider this. Why did so many civilizations separated by space and time develop near parallel astronomical knowledge? How did the Giza pyramids end up aligned with Orion, while in Central America, the Maya also oriented their temples toward the same stars? This persistent coincidence leads many to think there may have been a chain of instruction running through history. If that is true, then Atlas is not a stray visitor that arrived by chance. It may be the final piece in a plan spanning thousands of years. A plan our ancestors unknowingly participated in by watching the sky, recording observations, and building monuments. And now, when technology has matured, orbiting telescopes, quantum computers processing data, we are handed the next role. I want you to view this from a psychological angle. Humans tend to cherish their own achievements. When we built the Hubble, we took pride that it was the product of science, technology, and will. But what if, at some level, that pride is part of the design, meant to make us eager to cooperate without feeling coerced? That is the subtle point. We think we discovered things ourselves, while in truth, we are traveling along tracks already laid. From this perspective, Atlas is more than an odd visitor. It is a punctuation mark in a story that began millennia ago. When modern astronomers track it, they believe they are recording an unprecedented phenomenon. But perhaps they are simply continuing an observation that was begun in the age of pyramids. Science education teaches caution. Do not rush to conspiracy theories. Always seek evidence. But science also teaches that if a pattern repeats across cultures and generations, it deserves reflection. And the pattern here is the surprising coincidence between leaps in knowledge and the appearance of celestial phenomena. Personally, I believe that even if the idea of an invisible hand is merely metaphorical, it still offers a fresh lens on Atlas. It suggests the universe may be teaching us in subtle, patient, and sometimes very sophisticated ways. We are not coerced, but we remain curious, eager to decode, and inadvertently become obedient students of a cosmic classroom whose teacher no one has seen. So, if everything from ancient mathematics to modern telescopes was merely preparation, then Atlas's arrival is the final exam. It is no longer a harmless observation, but an evaluation of whether humanity is mature enough to perceive the greater purpose behind the points of light in the sky. As this section ends, I want to leave you with a thought. If history is not only humanity's story, but also a script written by a cosmic intelligence, then Atlas is the last line in the current chapter. And the task for you and me is to read the meaning hidden behind it. In the next part, we will go further. If there truly is an intelligence behind this, why choose this moment to reveal itself? Could the coincidence with humanity's current environmental and technological crises be anything but random? You and I both know that in the universe, everything has rhythm. The moon circles the earth circles the sun, and the planets keep a perfect dance that has lasted billions of years. Yet why should an object like 3I Atlas appear in this very century, at the precise stage when humanity faces its most severe crises? This coincidence makes many unable to treat it as a mere chance. Consider the current situation. Climate change is melting ice, causing floods, and wildfires are growing more intense. Artificial intelligence, the technology you and I are using to converse, is reshaping society at breakneck speed, bringing both hope and anxiety. And most importantly, humanity is looking to Mars as a backup plan, as Earth grows more fragile. In that context, Atlas appears unexpectedly. Is it a reminder or even part of a larger plan? Some scientists hypothesize that if a cosmic intelligence wanted to communicate or test us, the best time would be when we are technologically capable of noticing, but not yet powerful enough to resist. Indeed, humanity today sits exactly in that window. We have space telescopes and the capacity to analyze complex data, yet we are helpless if a massive object decides to alter its orbit or emit signals beyond our comprehension. This reminds me of a familiar everyday scenario. Imagine you are a teacher and your student has just learned the multiplication table. This is the perfect moment to present a harder problem to test whether they can apply what they have learned. If presented too early, the student will be confused and give up. If presented too late, the student will find the answer on their own and no longer need you. Might Atlas have arrived according to that logic? A cosmic exam for humanity? Another way to see it, Atlas's timing could be tied to cycles in Earth's and the solar system's development. Geological evidence suggests that roughly every 200,000 years, our planet experiences severe climate shifts, sometimes causing mass extinctions. If that is true, Atlas is not an unexpected event, but part of an astronomical schedule established long ago. From this angle, Atlas resembles a patient messenger. It carries a message written by thousands of generations and only opens it when we can read it. And now, when humanity finally has the technology to observe continuously, it finally manifests in our collective awareness. That makes me wonder whether we are not the first readers of this message. Perhaps in the past, there were other civilizations, maybe even previous human cycles, that saw Atlas or its kin and treated them as omens of coming change. I recall a personal view I want to share with you. Sometimes what frightens us is not someone out there, but the possibility that we are repeating a familiar script. Like watching the same play performed again with different actors, only the cast has changed. Atlas might be the prop brought on stage whenever humanity steps into a crisis. And we, though convinced we live in a unique era, may simply be the next generation in a long cycle. Science education gives us patience, observe, collect data, and compare before concluding. But science also encourages imagination. Imagination took us from small boats to the open ocean, from tiny telescopes to Mars missions. And imagination now prompts you and me to ask, if Atlas arrived at the right moment, who or what selected that moment? As this section closes, I want you to hold the thought that perhaps we are not merely watching an object pass by. We are participating in a staged historical moment where time, technology, and crisis intersect. And at that intersection, Atlas becomes a signal that forces humanity to answer. Is it time for you and me to step up to a new level? In the next part, we will explore more deeply. If Atlas is part of a long-term plan, the traces of that plan may already lie within the very DNA of humankind. You and I often think of DNA as merely a biological handbook, the manual that allows the body to grow, maintain life, and pass itself on to the next generation. But if I told you that within those double helices there might be another kind of information hidden, how would you react? Modern scientists have decoded most of the human genome. They've discovered that about 8% of our DNA seems not to come from natural evolutionary processes. It has no clear biological function, no connection to ancestral genes, and more importantly, it bears strange mathematical patterns. Instead of encoding proteins or enzymes, these segments resemble calculation formulas, sequences of numbers and relationships corresponding to celestial orbits. This sounds hard to believe, but remember how humans store data. We used to use magnetic tape, then CDs, hard drives, and now the cloud. Yet recent experiments show DNA may be the perfect memory. 1 gram of DNA can store an enormous amount of data, far more than any hard drive. If we can do that, then why can't a more advanced civilization? The question is, if there are odd code segments in human DNA, who put them there and for what purpose? A shocking hypothesis suggests these segments might actually be an astronomical map embedded in humanity hundreds of thousands of years ago as part of a larger project. An atlas, with its unusual trajectory, is the trigger for us to recognize this map. I know this easily brings to mind science fiction films where humans are someone's lab product, but let's stay calm. Instead of imagining control, think in terms of education. If a teacher wants students to truly grasp a concept, sometimes they plant clues in the assignment so the students discover it themselves. Perhaps our DNA is the assignment the universe has given us, a homework that spans 200,000 years. It's also important to stress, the presence of unusual DNA does not necessarily prove we are artificial products. It could be the trace of an ancient interfacing process where an extraterrestrial intelligence intervened to ensure that, at a certain point, humans could become observers of the cosmos rather than merely residents of a small planet. Let me share a simple comparison. You've seen pendulum clocks, right? The craftsman can set a tiny bell to ring at a precise time. All day long, the clock runs normally, but in that moment, the bell chimes. Our DNA could be like that. It functions as a biological handbook, but inside it holds an alarm that rings only when we are capable of understanding. And Atlas, perhaps, is the striking of that hour. What troubles me is this. If that's true, then are our thoughts, feelings, and actions truly free? Or are they programmed responses, activated under the right conditions? This is both a scientific and philosophical question. Because if everything is just a program, does free will still exist? Science education reminds us that asking questions is more important than rushing to answers. And here, the big question is, are we writing our own destiny or merely reading lines of code written long ago? Whatever the case, one undeniable truth is that DNA connects us to the universe in ways deeper than we imagined. It doesn't just say who we are. It may also remind us that we belong to a larger plan. In the next section, we will go further. If DNA is a data store, then who authored it? And why did they devote the effort to sow a plan that spans hundreds of thousands of years? If it's true that our DNA contains unusual code segments, the next unavoidable question is, who wrote them? And more importantly, why write them into your and my bodies instead of some other medium? There's an intriguing hypothesis that these code segments didn't come from some distant alien, but maybe products of earlier human civilizations. You and I often think human history spans only a few thousand civilized years from the advent of writing, but archaeology shows Earth has undergone many severe climate cycles, each capable of wiping out much of life. If technological civilizations existed before, they might have left messages in DNA as a way of bequeathing to descendants. Imagine this. Instead of carving words in stone or leaving a note in a bottle, they used life itself as the storage drive. With each generation, The message is copied and multiplied and eventually reaches us, those living in the 21st century. That might be the only way for information to persist across hundreds of thousands of years, when every structure and artificial material would erode or be destroyed. But if not humans of the past, then the bolder hypothesis, this could be the work of a cosmic intelligence, a life form adept at seeding new life on planets. In biology, there is a concept called panspermia, the hypothesis that life can be seeded from one planet to another via meteorites, cosmic dust, or extremophile microbes. If we extend this idea, our DNA could be the result of a kind of directed panspermia, guided rather than random. The next question is, why invest such effort? If a civilization is powerful enough to master interstellar technology, why not just store data in machines, rather than choose the more complex solution of writing it into human DNA? The answer may lie in the difference between dead data and living data. A hard drive or machine, no matter how sophisticated, will eventually fail, lose power, or be destroyed. But DNA, with its capacity to self-copy, self-maintain, and evolve, is a living hard drive. It not only stores data, but it also ensures that data persists, traveling with life itself. Moreover, embedding information in DNA creates an extremely subtle psychological effect. When humans discover that their own bodies contain a message, they will feel more connected to and responsible for that message. It isn't something external that can be ignored, it is part of ourselves. Personally, I see here a very human cleverness. We've done something similar. For example, when we want to preserve rice or corn varieties, we don't just write instructions on paper. We store seeds, so the next generation can plant again. If a cosmic intelligence wanted to preserve knowledge, why wouldn't they sow it in the very seeds of humankind? Of course, some will object. If there truly are strange codes in DNA, why don't we see them clearly? Here, science gives another lesson. Oftentimes, we only recognize anomalies once we have the right tools. Remember, only a few hundred years ago, we knew nothing of bacteria. That microworld always existed, but we were blind to it until the microscope. Perhaps the odd DNA codes are the same. Always there, waiting until our technology becomes refined enough to see. And that time is now. I want you to hold this thought. When Atlas passes by Mars, it may not only be doing something to the red planet, it may also be activating something within us. Dormant code segments in DNA suddenly come into focus, compelling scientists to ask questions and forcing humanity to see itself as more than the product of natural evolution alone. In the next part, we will delve deeper. If DNA holds a message, then Atlas may well be the key to decode it, and Mars the place where that message is put into practice. So what role does the red planet play in this grand plan? You and I have often heard that Mars is Earth's cousin. The planet is smaller, colder, yet holds many familiar traits. A day nearly as long as Earth's, an axial tilt that creates seasons, and traces showing that rivers and lakes once existed. So if you were a cosmic intelligence wanting to test the seeding of life, which planet would you choose? Naturally, Mars is the most reasonable choice in the solar system. From a scientific perspective, research shows Mars's atmosphere was once much thicker, enough to keep water in liquid form. Some event, perhaps the solar wind sweeping away its magnetic field, turned the red planet into a cold desert. But the important point is, it is not entirely dead. Water still exists as ice, and some minerals contain oxygen. That makes Mars like a foundation soil waiting to be improved. If Atlas truly is part of a project, then Mars is the natural laboratory. Here, the conditions are harsh enough to be challenging, yet pliable enough to be intervened upon. Releasing a small amount of compound or triggering chemical reactions from afar could set off a chain reaction. Like a gardener who only needs to sow a few seeds into the soil, while the sun and rain take care of the rest. Picture it this way. Earth is the house we live in, but Mars is the backup plot of land. Some see it as a second home where humans might go if Earth faces upheaval. But there's a bolder view. Mars is not just a refuge, It is a laboratory to test the adaptability of human DNA itself. If those strange code segments truly contain formulas for life in a new environment, then Mars is the only place to verify them. Personally, I think this is the most frightening yet compelling point. Atlas may not be aimed at Earth, but at activating a program on Mars. We, the observers, are merely happening to watch the performance. So then, what is our role? Spectators or participants? Relate this to everyday education. When a teacher wants to teach a major lesson, they often create a simulated environment. For example, in science class, students might place seeds in a closed container to observe how they sprout. That container is not a real field, just a miniature version for testing. Mars, through this lens, is the universe's simulation box. And humanity, whether we like it or not, has become the students observing the experiment. What makes me ponder is this. If Mars truly is a laboratory, then Atlas may play the role of catalyst. It doesn't need to bring an entire factory. It only needs to start the reaction. And once the reaction begins, it will evolve on its own over decades, even centuries, like a small spark that can set an entire dry forest ablaze. You might ask, why not choose Earth, where life is already abundant? The answer may be simple. Earth is too complex. If there is a cosmic experiment, you would want to start with a blank slate where results are easy to observe. Mars, with its blazing silence, is the perfect substrate to test a new biological program. I want to emphasize here that even if all of this is only hypothetical, Atlas's approach to Mars has already changed how we see the planet. It is no longer just the dream destination of NASA or SPACEX missions. It may be the convergence point of plans beyond imagination, and that very change in perspective is already a form of activation for human consciousness. As this short section ends, I want to leave you with a question. If Mars is a laboratory, then are you and I, the observers, also being tested in a larger laboratory called Earth? In the next part, we will look more closely. If Atlas truly is intervening on Mars, what signs show that the red planet has begun to change? You and I both know Mars has long been closely monitored by space agencies. A series of orbiters, rovers, and telescopes have sent back countless images and data. And interestingly, right before and after Atlas was discovered, some observations of Mars began to show small but hard to ignore anomalies. For example, atmospheric data shows slight fluctuations in methane concentration. Normally, methane on Mars is unstable. It breaks down quickly under sunlight. But unexpected spikes in concentration have been recorded in recent years, prompting debate among scientists about possible sources, perhaps geological activity or even microorganisms. Now, with Atlas's presence, a hypothesis arises. Could this interstellar object be assisting that process? Another anomaly lies at the poles. Satellite images show areas of ice temporarily melting, forming dark streaks resembling flows. At first, we thought this was a summertime phenomenon on Mars, but some observations indicate the frequency has increased unusually. If Atlas carries dust or compounds that could alter chemical reactions on the surface, then just a thin layer would be enough to make the ice melt faster. Let me help you picture this with a familiar example. Have you ever sprinkled salt on ice in winter? Salt lowers the freezing point, making ice melt faster even if the temperature doesn't change. If Atlas brought to Mars some kind of cosmic salt, perhaps an unusual form of carbon dioxide or organic compounds, it could create a similar effect. No need for a whole factory. Just a small intervention could shift the entire environmental balance. What makes this hypothesis compelling is that Atlas seems to have arrived just as Mars is in a tippable state. The atmosphere is thin, ice is plentiful, and temperatures are only a few dozen degrees away from what's needed, like a door ajar that needs just a gentle push to swing open. And Atlas may be that push. But I want to share a personal angle. What matters is not only whether Atlas truly causes changes, but how we respond to them. If a scientist sees methane levels rise, they will seek natural causes. If someone believes in cosmic hypotheses, they will think immediately of an extraterrestrial hand. Both views are important. One keeps us anchored to evidence, the other keeps our imagination expanding. So, is there clear evidence that Atlas is truly doing something to Mars? The answer is, there is no convincing proof yet. But the history of science teaches that major shifts often begin with faint signals. We observed Halley's comet before we understood orbits. We detected gamma-ray bursts before we knew they came from colossal stellar explosions. Perhaps today's fluctuations in methane and polar ice are the first signals. And if so, Atlas is not an indifferent passerby. It is like a craftsman who has begun testing brushstrokes on Mars's red canvas. The painting is unfinished, but the strokes are appearing. Here, I want you to pause for a moment and reflect. If Atlas truly is transforming Mars, then that means we are witnessing a deliberate cosmic event in our own era. In the millions of years of human existence, we have never had this opportunity. And you, sitting and listening to these lines, are also part of that rare moment. In the next section, we will move to a thornier topic. If Atlas and Mars truly are a cosmic experiment, then is humanity being tested at the same time? And if so, what is the goal of this cosmic exam? Have you ever asked yourself what exactly we're being tested on, if a test is truly underway? I often imagine this situation as a vast classroom in space. There, humanity is not merely an audience. We may be the subject of assessment, not a test of pure knowledge, but of our capacity to respond, our values, and how we organize society when faced with a major surprise. Let's begin with something obvious. Good exams don't just measure knowledge. They measure adaptability, cooperation, and decision-making under conditions of incomplete information. If an intelligence wanted to evaluate a species to see whether it could join an interstellar community, it wouldn't ask, "How much physics do you know?" They would ask, "Do you have enough cooperation, ethics, and resilience to live together when everything changes?" So what would the exam that Atlas, assuming it is part of an evaluation program, pose to humanity? From current data and hypotheses, I draw a few criteria that might be its targets. First, the ability to observe and understand. A civilization must first develop tools to observe interstellar phenomena, analyze samples, and share understanding transparently. That we have networks of telescopes, probes, and a global scientific community is a good sign. But observation alone isn't enough. We need the ability to interpret data scientifically and avoid panic. Second, the ability to cooperate across nations. A real risk exists. If the discovery of Atlas triggers excessive panic, countries might close off information, compete for data, or even weaponize the response. An evaluating intelligence would watch to see whether humans can rise above parochial interests and maintain a common objective. You and I have seen positive signs. International scientific bodies sharing data, but also negative ones. Disinformation and politicized debate. Third, the capacity for self-reflection and ethical questioning. This is pivotal. A civilization worthy of interstellar cooperation is not only strong in technology, it must also hold to the ethics of interaction, respect for other life, readiness to share resources, and a refusal to seize by force. When Atlas appeared, you and I saw major debates. Should we intervene in any process on Mars? Should we release all data immediately or hold some back to avoid panic? How society answers such questions shows whether we are moving forward or backward on the ethical scale. Fourth, psychological adaptability. This is a goal few consider. Can humans live amid uncertainty and change without widespread psychological collapse? The appearance of Atlas, the terraforming hypothesis, or the idea that our history has been guided, could induce panic or apathy. A wise exam would observe the collective response. Do we maintain our ability to work, organize society, care for one another, and keep a constructive spirit? In thinking this through, I always return to a personal observation. A good exam doesn't require the test taker to know they're being tested. If knowledge is forced, the reaction is gaming the system, sometimes cheating. But if evaluation is based on natural behavior response, cooperation, creativity, then the results truly reflect that species' adaptive capacity. If Atlas is such a challenge, then its appearance under the guise of a natural celestial body makes perfect sense. It lets us act naturally, unaware we are being evaluated. From an educational perspective, this is very familiar. When I teach, I sometimes place students in hypothetical situations without announcing the real objective. To observe soft skills: who leads, who listens, who falters. The outcomes often reveal qualities ordinary tests cannot measure. What does that mean for you and me right now? First, we should cultivate habits of analysis, cooperation, and ethical inquiry, not merely depend on experts. Second, we need to support transparent science, open data, public dialogue, and the strengthening of science education in communities. Third, humanitarian spirit must come first. Any action involving planetary modification or resources must weigh consequences for all living beings. To conclude this section, I want you to remember, if someone is evaluating humanity, then the way we treat information, one another, and other planets will determine more than rockets or telescopes ever could. Atlas may not be testing technical skills alone. It is testing what science, education, and civilization ultimately aim for: the ability to live together within a system larger than ourselves. When you think of an exam, you usually picture a paper test, a set of questions with right or wrong answers. But the exam Atlas suggests is entirely different. It's like an open exam with no specific instructions, no proctor, and no published answer key. You only know that every action, every decision, every reaction of humanity is being recorded, assessed, and weighed. In education, that's called performance-based assessment. You aren't just tested on theory, you must show how you apply it under unpredictable conditions. And Atlas, if it truly is a tool or deliberate project, may be playing a similar role for humanity. It creates circumstances that force us to reveal our nature. A simple example: government reactions. Right after news of Atlas, some countries chose to release all data and call for international cooperation. Others chose secrecy, revealing only parts, even seeking political advantage. That clearly shows a reality. We are not yet unified in how to face global challenges. If anyone is watching, they will note that humanity remains divided and easily swept up by short-term interests. But the positives are clear too. The international scientific community quickly formed exchange groups, shared observational data, and even bold hypotheses. On a personal level, I see that as a hopeful signal. Like in a classroom, even if some students still hide their notes, others are willing to share their notebooks with the group. And this may be the bright point a cosmic examiner appreciates. Another likely criterion is the capacity to remain calm amid uncertainty. When confronted with ambiguity, our psychology often swings toward fear, denial, or extremism. We've seen those reactions on social media. From fake news claiming Atlas is an alien weapon, to the belief that it is a savior that will turn Mars into paradise. Both extremes show how easily people fall into delusion when certain information is lacking. Yet amid that noise, there are communities that stay calm, continue analyzing data, and explain to the public in clear language. I recall an astronomer comparing this phenomenon to seeing smoke in the kitchen. You don't yet know whether it's a boiling kettle or a house fire. But the first step isn't to scream or run, it's to check. Such reactions show that humanity can remain rational, a precious capacity in the exam. Let me add a personal thought. Perhaps the core of this exam is not about technology or resources, but about choice. Which path will we choose when facing an unclear situation? Cooperation or confrontation? Openness or closure? Deep inquiry or settling for simple explanations? In everyday life, you and I face such exams too. When we hear a rumor in the community, we have two choices: spread it without verification, or pause to check the facts. When change hits our family or work, we can react with fear or seek ways to adapt. These small exams are the practice problems for the larger one. And Atlas, if it truly is a test, is scaling that practice up to the global level. One detail worthy of reflection: every exam has a time limit. You cannot submit forever. With Atlas, the deadline may be tied to its passage by Mars, its approach to the Sun, or its drifting beyond observation. In that window, our decisions will form the evaluation. And perhaps that evaluation will decide not only humanity's fate, but whether we advance to the next class in the universe. So the question I want to leave you with is, if there truly is an exam, what score do you think humanity would receive right now? High, low, or hovering at an average that still needs improvement? In the next part, we will go further. If Atlas is not only an exam for humanity, but also a sign of a much larger program spanning thousands of years, what awaits us behind history's curtain? When you and I look back at history, we often see it as a straight line, from ancient to modern, from arrows to rockets, from campfires to quantum computers. But if we look more closely, history resembles a circle, repeating cycles that may span hundreds or thousands of years. And in that picture, Atlas is not just a sudden bright point, but possibly a link in a cosmic cycle that has repeated many times. Do you remember the Sumerians? They were among the first civilizations to leave detailed records of the sky. Their clay tablets contain numbers, star positions, and even descriptions of unusual objects moving across the heavens. Many researchers have pointed out that some descriptions match the orbits of celestial bodies that we can only now recalculate. That forces us to ask, were they merely excellent observers, or were they prompted to look in the right direction? Similarly, the Egyptians built pyramids with astonishing astronomical precision. The Maya left calendars spanning thousands of years, predicting eclipse cycles and comets. The Inca oriented their architecture in ways we only now clearly understand as related to planetary motions. The question here is not merely how did they do it, but why did all these separate civilizations care about the sky and focus on a few overlapping points? When we connect the pieces, we see a pattern. After a long interval, certain signs recur. An object appears. People record it. Civilization changes. Then the object disappears, leaving more questions than answers. The circle continues, as if humanity is being periodically reminded that a greater lesson awaits. There's a very down-to-earth comparison, like a teacher assigning the same type of exercise each year to see whether the new class has improved over the previous one. If we put ourselves in the role of students, Atlas may be this year's exam, and the big question, will we do better than previous civilizations, or repeat the same mistakes? From a scientific standpoint, the idea of cycles is not far-fetched. Earth has climate cycles, such as recurring ice ages. There are geological cycles. Mountains rise and then erode. Even the universe cycles. Stars are born, burn, and explode, leaving elements for the next generation of stars. If everything operates in circles, why wouldn't the history of civilization? What makes me ponder is this. Perhaps these cycles are not purely natural, but also intervened upon. There may be an invisible hand adjusting things so that when an object like Atlas passes by, it coincides with a stage at which humanity is just advanced enough to perceive what is happening. Too early, we wouldn't understand. Too late, we would have missed it. The timing now seems right on schedule in a strange way. You might think, this is a mere coincidence. And yes, science teaches us to be cautious with easy inferences. But science also teaches us not to ignore recurring patterns, because patterns often conceal principles. Like a doctor who sees a patient's symptoms recur at the same time each year and immediately thinks of cyclical factors, allergies, environment, or biological rhythms. So if human civilization repeatedly looks up and sees a returning visitor, perhaps we should seriously ask, could this be part of a cycle far larger than human memory? On a personal level, I find this both anxiety-inducing and comforting. Anxiety, because it suggests we are not as free as we imagine, more like characters in a play performed again and again. Comfort, because if this cycle has happened before, there is at least evidence that humanity has survived, progressed, and can do so again. In the next section, we will dig deeper. If these historical cycles are guided, who or what stands behind that process? And what is their true objective? If we accept that history is cyclical, the next question is, who writes the script for those cycles? Is it a simple natural coincidence, or is there a hand arranging it? Looking back, one notable detail emerges. Many ancient civilizations did not just record astronomical phenomena, they also attached myths and prophecies about gods or people from the sky. Teaching them mathematics, architecture, and agriculture, the Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, the Maya mentioned Kukulkan, the Egyptians spoke of the god Thoth, transmitting knowledge. These tales may be metaphors, but they could also be collective memories of some form of external guidance. If indeed a long-term program is underway, then Atlas is not random. It may be a tool in that process, a testing device, or a reminder signal, released at the right time. Its precise path, its approach to Mars, and its tie to historical cycles make it hard to view as mere happenstance. You can picture this like a researcher monitoring a forest across many generations. They are not there constantly, but at intervals they send instruments or even introduce new species to see how the ecosystem responds. In that case, humanity may be a forest under observation, an atlas, a periodic monitoring device. What makes me reflect is this. If so, have we passed or failed previous exams? The epics, religions, and myths of many civilizations speak of golden ages followed by decline. Perhaps those declines were slip points in the exam, when people chose paths leading to division, violence, or dead ends. And each time, the cycle begins again with a new civilization. From the perspective of education science, this makes sense. Students who fail an exam can retake it, sometimes in a later term. But the question is, how many retakes are enough? Is humanity on its final attempt, or just one of countless recurring tests? Another intriguing element is the notion of erased memory. Many legends mention great floods, or forgetting, that wipes clean prior knowledge, forcing people to start over. If true, then after each failed cycle, much of the collective memory is erased, leaving only fragments in myths and relics. That would explain why we still encounter architectures that surpass the era's technological capacity, yet find no blueprints or detailed instructions. From my personal viewpoint, I see a double message here. On one hand, it suggests we do not fully control our destiny. We may be in a program designed long ago. On the other hand, it reminds us that each generation still has a chance to make a difference. We cannot change Atlas's appearance, but we can change how we respond, cooperate, and prepare. I want you to imagine this. If a watching intelligence truly exists, what they care about is not minutiae, but the broad trend. They look to see whether humanity is moving toward global cooperation or sinking into local conflict. Whether we use science to connect or to compete, whether we seek harmony with nature or continue to exploit it to exhaustion. These questions are the multiple choice version of the exam. There is no preset answer key, but each choice leads us down a different path, and Atlas, by its presence, may simply be forcing us to respond. In the next section, we will take a new direction. If Atlas is not only a test, but also a tool for transforming Mars, then this cycle may be bringing humanity to its most critical stage, the first time we witness a planet being rewritten right before our eyes. Let's step away from Earth in your imagination. Picture you and me standing on a red Martian plateau, the air thin and hazy, the sky tinged with a strange blue-grey. We look up and see a streak of light moving overhead. That is 3I Atlas. To the naked eye, it's only a bright speck, but to telescopes and scientific instruments, it is a trove of mysterious data. What's special about Atlas is not only that it comes from outside the solar system, but also that its trajectory allows it to pass close to Mars. Instead of choosing a path near Earth where every lens would converge, it tilts toward the red planet. Many researchers say this is merely the randomness of orbital mechanics. But if you ask, if someone wanted to test technology on a planet near Earth, but with less risk, which would they choose? The reasonable answer is Mars. Mars has long been a hotspot in human imagination. From the stories of H.G. Wells to modern robotic projects, it has always been seen as a potential second home. But look closer and you'll see enormous difficulty. Cold temperatures, high radiation, a thin atmosphere, virtually no magnetic field. Yet if an entity with interstellar technology could tune these factors, Mars would become an ideal laboratory. One popular hypothesis is terraforming, altering an entire planetary environment. Typically, to do this, humans think of creating a greenhouse effect, detonating nuclear devices at the ice caps, or releasing millions of tons of artificial greenhouse gases. But that's a centuries-long prospect, so costly as to seem nearly impossible. Now imagine Atlas as a resource delivery device. As it passes by, it could release volatile compounds like CO2, ammonia, or even complex organics. They could provide a push for Mars's atmosphere, kick-starting effects that would take humans thousands of years to achieve. Instead of a long-term project, it would be an instantaneous, deliberate event. I know this sounds bold, even fantastical, but remember, the idea of comets seeding life was once considered crazy. Today, many scientists consider the panspermia hypothesis, the spread of life via celestial bodies, entirely plausible. If comets can carry amino acids, then why couldn't a customized object carry something more complex? What makes me ponder here is the timing coincidence. Mars is at a stage of greatest human interest, a slew of robotic missions, plans to send people to the surface, and dreams of building bases. If Atlas had appeared 200 years ago, it would have passed unnoticed. If it arrived 200 years from now, humans might already be on Mars. But it has come at just the right moment, when we are just aware and technologically capable enough to observe, yet not strong enough to control. Like a midterm practical exam, you can think of this as the universe's open questionnaire. Atlas offers no explanations. It simply appears. We see it, measure it, form hypotheses, and ask ourselves, how will we respond? Will we only observe from afar, or try to approach? Will we grow fearful and fall silent, or begin serious discussion about its meaning? Personally, I feel that whether Atlas is deliberate or not, this event forces humanity to confront a question. Are we ready to think of Mars as a world in flux? No longer a distant, dead planet, but a body that may be getting rewritten before we set our first footsteps there. In the next part, we will delve deeper into specific signs. Is there any evidence that Atlas is truly carrying material to alter Mars, or is this all just a product of human imagination? When discussing the possibility that Atlas might do something to Mars, we need to return to actual evidence. Early observations from ground-based telescopes and orbiters suggest that Atlas carries an unusual ice shell. Unlike ordinary comets with water or dust tails, its composition contains a markedly higher fraction of CO2 and certain nitrogen compounds. If released near Mars, these molecules could temporarily thicken the atmosphere, creating a faint greenhouse effect. Imagine Mars as a cold room with a cracked window. In this scenario, Atlas is the visitor who stops by and temporarily patches a piece of the window to keep the warmth in. It's not a complete solution, but enough to make a difference in a planetary climate experiment. Another odd point, Atlas's rotation rate. Instead of tumbling chaotically like many comets, it has a regular spin period, almost suggesting that its surface is arranged in a way to maintain balance. Scientists can explain this as randomness from past collisions. But if you and I look from the design tool angle, a stable rotation period would help control the release of material, spreading it evenly along the trajectory as it passes Mars. And then there's spectral data. A few telescopes have recorded faint emission signals at wavelengths that don't match common compounds. Some research groups say these results are from unusual combinations of ice and dust. But others ask, could this be a technological signature? As if Atlas not only carries material, but also has a control circuit for the release process. Of course, science always encourages caution. We cannot rush to conclude that Atlas is a machine, but from a philosophical standpoint, something is interesting. The more strange evidence we encounter, the more we must face the possibility that the universe is not indifferent. It may contain purposeful processes we do not yet understand. So why Mars? It is the solar system's most Earth-like planet. Close enough for us to monitor, different enough to experiment on without directly affecting us. Like a doctor testing a new drug on a model before applying it to a real patient. Mars is the model that someone or something is using. My personal view is that even if Atlas is purely natural, treating it as a test still has value. It forces us to ask big questions about our role. If Mars truly is being tuned, do you think humans should participate in the process? Or should we stand aside, afraid, and miss the chance to learn? One small lesson we can draw here. Science is not only data collection, it is also a training of the mindset. When faced with a strange phenomenon, we can either close ourselves within familiar assumptions or open up to the possibility that something lies beyond our current frame of understanding. You and I both know that the human psyche often fears the new, but sometimes, precisely in that unfamiliarity, we find a way forward. Atlas, whether a wandering shard of ice or a deliberate project, has given humanity a chance to practice facing the unknown. And in the process, we learn more about ourselves. In the next part, we will explore, if Atlas truly is involved in transforming Mars, what is the ultimate goal? Is it merely an experiment or part of a long-term plan tied to humanity's future survival? When you hear the word terraforming, you might immediately think of science fiction films where barren planets turn into lush worlds after a few minutes of fast forward. But in real science, this concept has been discussed for decades. It means transforming a planet to become more like Earth, at least enough for humans to live there without thick, restrictive spacesuits. Mars has long been the top candidate. It has a day length similar to Earth's, an axial tilt that creates seasons, and evidence that rivers and lakes once existed. However, Mars's biggest problem is that its atmosphere is too thin, not enough pressure to keep liquid water, not enough protective layer to block solar radiation. Therefore, any plan must start by thickening the atmosphere. This is exactly the point that makes many people suspicious about Atlas. It could act as a starter agent. Imagine this. As it passes through an orbit near Mars, it releases a large amount of CO2 or NH3, ammonia. These gases are strong greenhouse gases. If large enough, they could begin a chain reaction, warming the surface, releasing more CO2 from polar ice layers, and gradually creating a self-reinforcing loop. For humanity, to do this would take centuries, countless transport vessels, and costs far beyond the budget of the entire planet. But an object prepared in advance, passing at the right moment, could accomplish it in a single approach. I know this sounds like a bold hypothesis, but remember, the idea of seeding life with comets was also once considered absurd. Today, scientists have found amino acids on the comet 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko, proving that these dirty ice blocks can carry the ingredients for life. So why couldn't an object like Atlas carry the ingredients for a larger project? Resetting a planet's climate. Another way to see it is to regard Atlas as a piece of a long-term plan. It may not be enough to complete terraforming, but it initiates a chain of events. After Atlas, other objects would arrive from other trajectories, each bringing a supplementary component, like a series of trucks hauling construction materials to a site, step by step, turning an empty lot into a finished home. What's worth pondering is this: if this really is a project, when did it begin? Interstellar trajectories are not something you can calculate on a whim. For an object like Atlas to arrive at exactly this time, someone would have had to plan it tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years in advance. This far exceeds the reach of any civilization we know. On the philosophical side, I see a paradox here. Humanity often prides itself on preparing for the future by years or decades. But if some intelligence can prepare millennia ahead, then we are like students entering a classroom designed by a cosmic instructor. In this view, Atlas is merely part of the syllabus. From a science education standpoint, this idea teaches us an important lesson. Cosmic timescales are entirely different from human lifespans. What we consider long, a century, a millennium, may be just an instant in a grand plan. Personally, I believe that whether or not Atlas is actually building Mars, this event teaches us this: broaden our vision beyond a human lifetime, and consider that the universe's great projects may not be for us to control, but for us to learn how to participate in. In the next section, we will examine, if the goal is to transform Mars, then for whom? Is it to serve an extraterrestrial civilization, or is it to prepare a backup home for humanity's future? If we assume that Atlas is not merely a passerby, but truly participates in a Mars terraforming project, then the biggest question is, for whom is this project intended? Some argue that if this is the work of an extraterrestrial civilization, then Mars could become a transit station or technology testbed for them. But there is a more interesting, bolder hypothesis. Perhaps this project is designed for humanity itself. Why do I say that? Because everything coincides with the moment when humanity is facing global problems: climate change, resource depletion, and population pressure. We are discussing the need for a plan B for Earth. And then, right at that moment, Atlas appears, passing close to Mars, as if offering a hint. Look this way. It's time to prepare for the next step. Some scientists even point out oddities in human DNA. You and I both carry nonsense segments with no clear function, yet common across all peoples. Some studies suggest that certain gene sequences contain mathematical patterns related to celestial orbits. If true, then haven't humans been pre-installed to track objects like Atlas? I know that, to the ordinary ear, this sounds like it stepped out of a science fiction novel. But remember, many great inventions were once considered crazy before being proven. The idea that bacteria could cause disease was rejected for centuries. The idea that humans could fly was once a joke. So why can't we open our minds to the hypothesis that a grand survival plan is underway? One we are only beginning to recognize. Look at it from another angle. If a superior intelligence truly wanted to eliminate humanity, there would be millions of simpler ways. They wouldn't need to adjust Mars for anything. But if the goal is to sustain humanity as part of a long-term project, then Mars becomes a reasonable destination. It's close enough for migration, harsh enough to spur the evolution of consciousness, and different enough to force humans to develop new technologies. Here I see a familiar philosophy: challenge to mature. You and I both know that in personal life, the hardest periods are when we learn the most. If everything is too easy, people rarely change. Mars, with its harsh environment, may be the final exam that lets humanity step out of cosmic childhood and become a mature civilization. The question is, are we ready to face this challenge? Or will we simply stand by, wait, and let the opportunity slip away? In education, this evokes the concept of scaffolding. A good teacher doesn't hand over the entire solution, but provides just enough hints for students to find the answer themselves. Atlas may be a kind of cosmic scaffolding. It doesn't do the work for us, but sets up a situation that forces us to think, collaborate, and change. Personally, I believe that if this truly is a project for humanity, then Atlas is neither the beginning nor the end, but merely one piece in a long chain. There may have been other Atlases in the past that we failed to recognize, and in the future, other objects may come, each carrying a portion of the mission. In the next section, we will delve deeper into this hypothesis. Could Atlas be a signal that a cycle of human preservation has been repeated throughout history? And if so, which turn of the wheel are we on now? Let's pose a big question. Is this the first time humanity has faced an Atlas scenario? Or are we simply following a loop that has occurred many times in the past? When you look back at ancient traces, some details are hard to explain. Structures like the Giza pyramids, the Maya stone temples, or the massive formations beneath the sea off Japan keep archaeologists arguing, how could an ancient society achieve such precision and scale? Some hypotheses suggest they were the achievements of prehistoric civilizations that disappeared, erased from collective memory by catastrophic events like floods, supervolcanic eruptions, or global climate change. If so, humanity may not be just beginning to build a technological civilization. We could be the newest generation in a chain of many prior civilizations, each reaching a limit and collapsing, only for a new one to rise from the ashes. In this scenario, Atlas appears as a periodic checkpoint. It comes not to destroy, but to observe and support. If a civilization reaches the required level, it brings opportunities to migrate, or even tools to climb to the next rung. If the civilization fails, the loop restarts, and humanity loses tens of thousands of years recovering. You can relate this to an annual health checkup. A doctor doesn't come to change your life, but to see if your body is fit to continue. If illness is found, they prescribe medication or supportive therapy. In this view, Atlas may be the cosmic physician, arriving to examine humanity's stage of development, and depending on the results, providing the necessary dose. What makes me ponder is this. If these cycles really exist, which round are we on? The 1st or the 10th, the 20th? And if there were earlier rounds, at what point did they fail? Was it due to internal conflict, natural disaster, or an inability to overcome fear of the unknown? Some genetic studies suggest there were bottlenecks in human history, times when the global population dropped to only a few thousand survivors. Those bottlenecks could coincide with failed attempts in the cyclical exam. Yet from those few survivors, humanity recovered, carrying a faint memory of gods or strange celestial visitors who once came by. From an educational standpoint, I think of a principle. You study and retake until you understand the lesson. A student may fail several times, but eventually still has a chance to try again. If the universe operates this way, then Atlas's existence is not a threat, but a chance to prove that this time, humanity has learned the lesson. Personally, I feel Atlas's presence is like a mirror. It reflects our entire developmental journey, from people watching the sky with naked eyes thousands of years ago to engineers running modern telescopes. It reminds us that if we want to step into a new cycle, we need unity and a mindset that looks beyond a single human lifetime. And if you want a more down-to-earth example, think of an American farmer caring for his cornfield. Each season, he sows, harvests, then lets the soil rest. If a season fails due to pests or drought, he sows again the next season, learning from mistakes. Humanity is similar. Each cycle may be a growing season, and Atlas is how the universe checks whether we're ready for a golden harvest or still repeating old errors. In the next section, we'll keep asking, if Atlas truly is part of a preservation cycle, why is that cycle tied to human DNA? And why do there seem to be keys to this scenario embedded in each of our bodies? If Atlas truly is part of a preservation cycle, what mechanism ensures continuity between loops? The answer may lie in our very bodies, DNA. Geneticists have discovered that more than 90% of the human genome consists of non-coding segments. For a long time, they were called junk DNA because their functions were unclear. But recent studies show that some of these segments can act like switches, turning traits on or off under certain environmental conditions. Strangely, some of these sequences carry mathematical patterns similar to astronomical equations. Pause and think. If those patterns truly relate to astronomy, might humans be programmed to recognize events like Atlas? As in software, hidden code blocks activate only when the right signal arrives. Atlas could be that signal. Across many cultures, we find legends that humans were made from the stars, or gods sowed the seeds of life on Earth. Through a scientific lens, These stories may be faint memories of ancient intervention in DNA. If true, then humanity is not merely a product of natural evolution, but also a biological project with a clear objective. From an educational perspective, this resembles teachers scheduling hidden quizzes into the syllabus. Students may not know when the test will arrive, but when the time comes, the questions appear exactly as arranged. Our DNA may carry such assignments, code segments that do nothing in everyday life, but flare to life when the cosmos calls. Personally, I believe the existence of odd imprints in DNA is strong evidence for the preservation cycle hypothesis. It suggests humanity has not been abandoned, but prepared, at least given a chance to survive the harshest phases. But there is a paradox here. If DNA truly holds the keys to survival, then is our free will only an illusion? If every crucial response is pre-coded, are your and my decisions today truly choices, or merely the operation of a genetic program written hundreds of thousands of years ago? This is what troubles me. Because if everything is arranged, do personal effort and creativity still matter? I think they do. Just as in a classroom, the teacher can provide the assignment, but how the student solves, innovates, and interprets still bears their unique mark. DNA can set the frame, but our experience and consciousness color the picture. A close comparison. Consider pilot training programs. All cadets are taught from the same curriculum, but they don't react identically in emergencies. Some stay calm, others panic. That difference determines who becomes an excellent pilot and who is eliminated. If Atlas is humanity's flight check, DNA is only the syllabus. The result depends on how we respond. Perhaps that's also why the cycle keeps repeating. Each generation, each civilization has a chance to prove it's not merely following biological programming, but can rise above it through autonomous consciousness. We pass the exam not by reciting pre-coded answers, but by creating a new understanding, a creative solution beyond expectation. Viewed this way, Atlas is not a predetermined sentence, but a rare opportunity for humanity to show that consciousness is not just a product of DNA, that we can make decisions not included in a biological forecast. And perhaps the very moment humans demonstrate the ability to write a new script is when the preservation cycle truly ends, giving way to an entirely new era. In the next section, we will go further. If DNA is indeed hidden software, then Atlas may be the activator. But what is the goal after activation? Is it merely to preserve life, or to push humanity toward a leap in consciousness that no previous cycle has ever achieved? Since childhood, you and I have been taught that Mars is a neighboring planet, ruddy and barren. It appears in science books, in science fiction films, and even in the dreams of explorers. But through the lens of Atlas, Mars is not just a planet. It is a cosmic laboratory where an exam for humanity is being conducted. Try to imagine, why doesn't Atlas come to Earth, where life already exists? Why does it choose an orbit that sweeps close to Mars, a place more fragile, more severe? Perhaps because Earth is too crowded, too noisy with life, making it hard to observe pure change. By contrast, Mars is a blank notebook. Write a few lines, and the entire page takes on new meaning. Scientists have long debated that Mars once had oceans, a thick atmosphere, and perhaps could support life. But for some reason, the planet lost its magnetic field, lost its atmosphere, and gradually became arid. If some cosmic intelligence wanted to test the recreation of life, then Mars is the perfect candidate. It has sufficient size, adequate minerals, and sits not too far and not too near the sun. This recalls a down-to-earth comparison for me, like farmers choosing a fallow field to test a new crop variety. The field has been abandoned, no one will miss it, and if the trial succeeds, it will become a fertile plain. If it fails, at least the main harvest isn't ruined. Mars is that field in the farm of the solar system. In this vein, Atlas can be seen as the first sower, not of rice or corn, but of atmosphere, of water, of microorganisms, or even of a pre-designed biological program. and Mars is the place where those seeds sprout, creating a new living environment. But the interesting thing here isn't just the sowing, it's the observation of humans as they witness the process that matters most. Space agencies, scientists, and the global community are watching Mars day by day. When we see the atmosphere shift, the colors change, we are not only watching a planet transform, we are also reflecting on ourselves. How do we respond when confronted with cosmic power? I believe this is the crux. Mars is not only the subject of an experiment, but a mirror reflecting human psychology. When we see a force out there capable of reshaping an entire planet, how will we react? Will we shrink in fear or move forward in curiosity to learn? Will we choose to believe it's a threat or an opportunity? This leads me to a personal perspective. Each of us has lived through our own Mars, a blank, seemingly hopeless phase that changed with a single chance, a little atlas. For humanity, Mars is the magnified version of that experience. It compels us to face the fact that while we may not control everything, we can choose how to respond. From the standpoint of science education, Mars is a direct lesson in planetary fragility. Compared with Earth, you see it clearly. Earth has a magnetic field shielding it from radiation. Mars does not. Earth has a thick atmosphere that retains water and heat. Mars's is thin, easily blown away by the solar wind. This comparison clarifies one thing. Life depends on factors that seem small, yet are supremely important. If Atlas can return those factors to Mars, then this is not only a technical marvel, but also a vast educational message to humanity. Do not take your planet for granted. We can learn how to protect Earth, or at least prepare for worst-case scenarios, by observing Mars. And I wonder, perhaps by letting us witness Mars's transformation, some intelligence wants to teach us a lesson that cannot be conveyed in words. Maybe they believe a visual image, a red planet gradually turning green, has more awakening power than any advice. In the next section, I want to go deeper with you. If Mars truly is a laboratory, then what role do we, humans, play in this experiment? Are we merely spectators, or will we one day become direct participants? If we regard Mars as a laboratory, the next natural question arises. What is humanity's role in this experiment? Are you and I merely spectators sitting on the sidelines, or are we part of the experiment itself? There are two thought-provoking possibilities. The first possibility, we truly are only spectators. Atlas arrives, carries out changes on Mars, and humans simply watch, learn, and draw lessons for ourselves. In this scenario, the goal is global education. Humanity observes a barren planet being rezoned with life, and thereby better understands Earth's own fragility. This is like a planet-scale practical class, where the lecture is not in books, but unfolding before our eyes. The second possibility, we are not only spectators, but also subjects of the experiment. The changes on Mars are not just to transform the planet, but to observe how humans react, cooperate, or fracture when faced with an undeniable reality. From this angle, Mars becomes a giant screen, and we are the actors in a casting test. I find the second scenario more plausible. The reason is that history has shown humans rarely learn any lesson by observation alone. We usually must be put into difficulty before behavior changes. For example, environmental warnings have existed for decades, but only when severe storms, wildfires, or droughts strike do people truly act. With Mars, witnessing a planet revive may trigger a different reflex in us. If they can do it there, what can we do for Earth and for ourselves? On a personal level, I think of the feeling the first time I saw a simple classroom experiment, just a solution changing color in a test tube, yet it opened a vast scientific world to me. Mars transforming under Atlas's influence is like that giant test tube. The difference is that this time, an entire planet is participating. From another science education perspective, Mars offers a chance to test technologies that humans still toddle with. For instance, terraforming, planetary environmental engineering, remains on paper. Scientists have proposed dozens of methods, from detonating nuclear devices to release ice, to building giant mirrors to reflect sunlight. But all of it is theoretical. If Atlas is actually doing this in practice, humanity will have a living textbook to study. However, this is also where a profound philosophical lesson appears. Are we ready to accept that we are merely students in the universe's classroom? This means setting aside the pride that humans are the center, the sole pioneers. Instead, we must accept that there may be a higher teacher using Mars to teach us something. Some may find this prospect unsettling, but I find a certain comfort in it. Because if there truly is a class, it means the universe has not abandoned us. On the contrary, it cares enough to arrange lessons on a planetary scale. The remaining question is, which lesson will we learn? Will we choose dependence, waiting for the teacher to do everything while we reap the rewards? Or will we choose autonomy, turning the lesson into a springboard to go further? I believe the most important part of the experiment does not lie on Mars, but in human psychology as we watch Mars change. When people see the red planet gradually grow green, debates will flare. Is that a threat or an opportunity? A warning or an invitation? Those questions are the very exam humanity must face. In the next section, I want to venture a bold hypothesis with you. If Mars truly is a laboratory, then the outcome of this experiment will determine not only the fate of a planet, but the fate of human consciousness in the cosmos. If Mars is the laboratory, then the target of observation is not only its atmosphere or geology. The real target may be human consciousness. You and I often think of science as a chain of data and philosophy as nebulous questions. But in the context of Atlas, these two aspects blend. Consciousness is treated as a variable in the cosmic experiment. Try putting yourself in the place of an intelligence beyond Earth. If you can travel among the stars and reshape an entire planet, what would you want from a young civilization like ours? Technology? Raw materials? Probably not. Whatever we possess, they could create more easily. But consciousness, the way we think, dream, and create, is different. It is the product of millions of years of evolution and cannot be perfectly copied by machines. This reminds me of training on a musical instrument. A piano can be mass-produced, but the player, with their unique style, is what's truly one of a kind. Human consciousness is like that. It cannot be simply duplicated. It can only be tested, shaped, or discarded if it proves unfit. From a science education angle, this resembles a colossal psychology experiment. When a group of students faces a simulated emergency, what the teacher cares about is not whether they've memorized the lesson, but how they react, calm and cooperative, or panicked and scrambling. With Atlas, Mars is the simulation, and humankind is the class being observed. This raises an important question. Which reaction counts as correct? We have no clear answer, and perhaps never will. But I have a thought. If the universe cares about consciousness, then the correct response may be the one that opens the way to learning and cooperation, rather than locking us into fear and denial. Personally, I think this is both humanity's weakness and its strength. We tend to be bewildered by the new, but we also have a remarkable capacity to turn bewilderment into the drive to inquire. Just as when seeing a strange phenomenon in the sky, people can call it a bad omen, or they can build a telescope to watch more closely. The attitude we choose is precisely what Atlas may be grading. Another aspect worth mentioning, collective consciousness. Not only individuals, but society as a whole will reveal its reactions. Social media, journalism, politics, all become data in the exam. We've seen how even a minor natural phenomenon can trigger massive waves of rumor and conspiracy theories. Atlas, with its magnitude, will amplify this trend many times over. And perhaps that too is part of the plan, to observe whether humanity can discern truth from falsehood, or is drowned by the very noise it creates. Compare this to everyday life. When a crisis hits a community, people care not only about the incident itself, but also about how the community responds. Do people help each other or blame each other? Does the group maintain trust or dissolve into chaos? Mars could be that global incident, a test of collective psychology. For me, this opens a personal lesson. We cannot choose whether Atlas arrives, but we can choose how we view it. If we see it as a threat, we'll respond with fear. If we see it as an opportunity, we'll respond with creativity. And who knows, that may be the very right answer a cosmic intelligence is waiting for. In the next section, we'll take a step further. If consciousness is the core of the exam, can human consciousness truly transcend the framework of DNA and biological programming? Or is what we call freedom merely a refined illusion of a program written hundreds of thousands of years ago? In the previous section, I proposed with you the hypothesis that human consciousness might be the very focus of the cosmic experiment. But if so, a weighty question arises. Is consciousness truly free, or merely the product of biological programming? Scientists have long known that DNA contains not only the genetic code for the body, but also profoundly influences behavior, emotion, and even modes of thought. Some studies show that certain genes relate to levels of anxiety, memory capacity, or risk-taking tendency. If a part of your and my consciousness originates in DNA, then the question of, do we have free will, becomes much more complex. Now imagine that those genes are not the random result of evolution, but were deliberately installed hundreds of thousands of years ago. This would mean our collective reactions, curiosity, fear, resistance, or cooperation, all fall within expectation. Atlas appears, and the genes within us activate a response like a pre-written program. We think we're choosing, but in truth, we're just running a script. A close analogy is when you install an app on your phone. The user believes they have dozens of choices in the menu, but in reality, every option has already been programmed by the developer. Whatever you pick, you cannot escape the framework the app has built. DNA may be such an app, and consciousness the interface we believe is free. However, I don't think that means all is hopeless. Even within a programmed framework, there are still spaces for creativity. A musician plays fixed notes, yet can make the piece utterly unique. Human consciousness is similar. Perhaps the frame is genetic, but how we employ it, how we connect ideas, and especially our capacity for social cooperation still make a difference. From an educational perspective, this is a chance to understand the brain's operation more deeply. Many teachers know that students often learn by habit, but when presented with a novel situation, a class can unexpectedly produce a student who creates beyond expectations. This shows that even within preset models, the possibility of breaking through exists. For humanity, Atlas may be that novel situation. It forces us to face a reality outside every prediction, and in that moment, human consciousness may reveal abilities that genetics does not control. That is the capacity to transcend. Personally, I believe this transcendence does not lie in dramatic reactions, but in lucidity. When we recognize that we may be programmed, we've already taken a small step beyond the program. Like when you dream and know you are dreaming, the dream becomes lucid, letting you steer it. Perhaps consciousness is the same. Recognizing the framework is the first step to surpassing it. Another interesting point. History offers evidence of such transcendence. Those periods when humanity suddenly leapt in creativity, the European Renaissance, or the scientific explosion of the 20th century, can be seen as proof that consciousness sometimes breaks every genetic limit, evolving faster than genes would allow. If it happened before, it can happen again, this time under the pressure of Atlas. But this raises another, somewhat frightening question. Were those past breakthroughs also arranged by a hand from beyond? Perhaps those moments when humanity believed it was bursting into freedom were merely parts of a long cosmic script. This is the very paradox that keeps me awake. We can never be sure what is real and what is illusion in this game. Yet that paradox also opens a door, because if consciousness truly can recognize its constraints, then it can also escape them. And perhaps that is the goal of the hidden exam Atlas presents. to see whether humans can perceive the game, and then choose to play it in their own way. In the next section, I want to go further with you. If free will is only an illusion, then what is the true meaning of survival? Is existing as a useful biological device more valuable than going extinct as an independent species? You and I have reached an extremely sensitive point. If consciousness is merely a kind of programming, does existence still have meaning? Imagine a scenario. Humanity is saved by Atlas by creating a new Mars where we can continue to breathe, eat, and reproduce. But if all our thoughts, dreams, even our longing for freedom are products of pre-written code, then is survival any different from a machine being serviced to run for another 1,000 years? To bring it closer to home, let me use a familiar example. Have you ever kept ornamental fish? In a glass tank, they're fed regularly, the water is filtered clean, and artificial light simulates day and night. From the fish's perspective, that might be an entire, complete world. But you and I know it's only an environment designed to keep them alive. The question is, if fish had consciousness like ours, would they be content in the tank? Or would they yearn for a real ocean? Under Atlas's hand, Mars could become a vast glass tank like that. Every condition is tuned to suit life, yet always within the control of a superior intelligence. At that point, we must face a choice. Accept safe survival in a cosmic tank, or yearn for freedom even if that freedom may lead to extinction. Human history is not short on similar situations, though on a smaller scale. Slaves in antiquity were fed, sheltered, and had food. Yet they rose, because for them, living without freedom was worse than death. Americans in the 18th century understood this when they wrote in the Declaration of Independence, "Give me liberty or give me death." That sentence still sends chills today because it strikes at the core. What value does life have if it is completely controlled? I don't have an absolute answer, but I do have a belief. The very act of posing that question already shows that human consciousness can rise above programming. If everything were just code, we would be satisfied with mere survival. But instead, we hesitate. We try to challenge the safety that Atlas might bring. This shows that freedom, or at least the yearning for it, is not easily extinguished. From a scientific point of view, this choice also reflects an important distinction. Survival belongs to biology, but freedom belongs to psychology, and psychology is the foundation that drives creativity and progress. A society that only survives without freedom of thought will soon stagnate. In contrast, a society that dares to dream of freedom despite the risks has the capacity to leap in thinking. You can see this in the history of science. Major inventions often came from individuals who dared to challenge the thought tank of their era. Therefore, if Atlas truly wants to make us part of a long-term project, it can maintain us in a state of survival. But if it wants to see whether humans can reach the level of freedom of consciousness, something even programming cannot predict, then it will place us before a dangerous situation, choose safety, or accept risk to hold on to freedom. Personally, I lean toward the second hypothesis, because if a cosmic intelligence has invested hundreds of thousands of years sowing life and consciousness on Earth, it must be concerned not only with biological survival, but with the quality of that consciousness. A fish tank cannot produce philosophy, cannot compose music, cannot question itself, but humans are different. And perhaps the very ability to ask about freedom is what Atlas is testing. In daily life, we see this choice repeated. A person may choose a stable, repetitive job for a peaceful life, or risk pursuing a dream, even at the cost of financial safety. There is no absolute right or wrong answer, but the key point is that having the choice itself creates the difference between a human and a machine. If Atlas only wanted us to persist, it could have exerted total control from the start. But giving us a moment to ask ourselves may be proof that it, too, is curious to see what we choose. And perhaps that choice, whether to survive in a tank or to risk seeking freedom, is precisely the message humanity sends back to the universe. In the next section, I want you to go deeper with me. If freedom truly matters that much, then how can we protect it, even while living in an environment designed by another intelligence? In the previous section, you and I paused at an awkward balance, survival under control or freedom with risk. So the question is, if we choose the path of freedom, what tools do we have to protect it against Atlas's immense power? First, let's look back at history together. Freedom has never been a pre-granted gift. It has always been won by human will, by creativity, and by steps that seemed impossible. Long ago, Galileo looked through a crude telescope and asserted that Earth was not the center of the universe. He faced repression, but in the end, that idea paved the way for humanity. The lesson is, freedom begins with seeing the truth, even when that truth is dangerous. In Atlas's case, the truth might be that we are inside a vast experiment, or even programmed down to our DNA. But acknowledging truth does not mean surrender. On the contrary, recognizing truth helps us find the cracks, the places where freedom can take root. A familiar example. In daily life, you may be bound by work, family, and society, yet many people still find a private sky, a morning walk, a book read in silence, or a few lines in a journal no one knows about. Those moments are small, but they are the seeds of freedom. On the scale of humanity, perhaps such private skies, small but genuine choices, are how we defend independent consciousness amid the pressure of a superintelligence. From an educational standpoint, this is crucial. When teaching a child, you cannot fully decide who they will become. You can provide a framework, but the child will always find ways to break the mold in their own fashion. Good education is not coercion. It is creating space for freedom to sprout. Perhaps Atlas is educating us in a similar way. But if we understand that, we can actively hold on to truly free moments, instead of being swept along by every directive. I also want to share a personal view. Freedom does not necessarily come from opposing the entire system. Sometimes freedom lies in redefining the meaning of existence. If Atlas wants us to become biological tools, we can still turn that role into something more sacred, such as the mission to preserve memory, emotion, and unique experiences that machines cannot copy. In that way, even within a framework, we still assert our humanity. But this leads to a paradox. If we accept turning survival into a programmed project, does freedom still exist? Or is the very act of choosing how to interpret and enrich our role itself already an act of freedom? Let's return to the fish tank image. Some fish swim in familiar circles, but some will try to jump out, knowing the risk. The issue is not merely escape or remain. The issue is the meaning of the choice. Once a fish becomes aware that it is in a tank, even continuing to swim inside becomes a decision tinged with freedom. Perhaps the most important thing is not to escape Atlas, but to maintain our capacity for self-awareness. Because as long as we can ask, is this programming? We are stepping beyond the framework by a little. And that may be the real reason Atlas places us in this situation, to see whether, under absolute control, humans can still find a crack for freedom. In life, you and I have felt this too. Sometimes everything seems predetermined. Work, responsibilities, schedules. But one day, you decide to change your route to work just to see a new dawn. A small act, yet it affirms that you can change. For humanity, each act like that, each moment of breaking from a set orbit, is a seed for protecting freedom. Thinking about Atlas, I ask myself, perhaps what that intelligence wants to test is not whether we have the technological might to break free, but whether we have the spiritual will to still choose freedom, however small, in a universe full of constraints. In the next section, I want you to delve with me into a bigger paradox. If freedom can exist, even within programming, then what are the true limits of consciousness? Can it reach beyond biological confines, or will it forever be bound within the DNA fish tank? You and I have talked a great deal about freedom, But now we must face a key question: does consciousness truly have limits? If DNA, biological programming, and even the cosmic environment all shape how we think, then where is the stopping point, the glass ceiling that consciousness cannot break through? In neuroscience, there's a concept called cognitive bandwidth. Each brain can process only a certain amount of information at any given time. Think back to a busy evening, replying to emails, answering the phone, trying to remember whether you turned off the stove. Inevitably, you feel as if your brain has frozen. This shows that consciousness has a finite capacity. It cannot bear the infinite. Scaling up to the human species, might civilization itself also have a shared bandwidth? We can build satellites, compute orbits, decode genes, yet we remain stuck on repeating questions. Where do we come from? Do we have freedom? Perhaps Atlas is an exam to see whether we can break that bandwidth limit and step into a new tier of consciousness. Picture it like this. If our ordinary consciousness is a room with 4 walls, then moments of creativity, enlightenment, or even spiritual experience are when we open a small window in the wall. Through it, we glimpse a wider sky, then return to our room with a new perspective. But the big question is, can we break the wall entirely, so consciousness is no longer confined to the original room? I believe history has hinted at such moments. When Einstein proposed relativity, he didn't just add a brick to the house of science, he almost built a new house with an entirely different cognitive space. That proves consciousness can break limits that seemed absolute. Atlas may be waiting to see whether we can make another leap like that, not just in science, but in how we understand ourselves. From an educational viewpoint, this recalls the zone of proximal development. When teaching children, we set challenges that are just hard enough, not so easy as to bore, not so hard as to crush. In some way, Atlas is placing humanity in a cosmic zone of proximal development. It presents a colossal challenge, a planet to be remade, a truth about origins to be faced, yet still within reach if we pour in our full intellect and will. Personally, I think the true limit of consciousness does not lie in the physical brain, but in our own beliefs. A marathoner may think their body is finished at kilometer 30, yet by pushing step by step, they reach 42. The initial limit wasn't the body, but the perception. Perhaps consciousness is the same. The real limit is what we accept, not what is programmed. Yet a paradox appears. If Atlas has already anticipated humanity's capacity to break limits, then is our ceiling break truly an escape, or just the next step in the program? This question torments many modern philosophers, but I want to see it another way. Even if the jump lies within the script, the moment we become aware of that fact already creates a new kind of freedom. As in a video game, you know you're in the game, but when you discover ways to beat it beyond the developer's expectations, you've created your own path. Perhaps that is the path humanity must find. We don't have to shatter every barrier at once, but we can choose moments and approaches that keep consciousness from merely repeating the existing program and instead open a new direction. However small, those cracks can become tunnels leading to a higher tier of consciousness where limits are only illusions. In the next section, I want to go further with you. If consciousness truly can transcend limits, what form will it take afterward? Will it still be human as we know it, or become something entirely different beyond our own recognition? In the previous section, I spoke with you about the glass ceiling of consciousness and the possibility of breaking free. Now imagine, if humans really surpassed that limit, what would consciousness look like? Some neuroscientists suggest that when the brain operates at its highest states, during creative surges or near-death experiences, we can feel a kind of expanded consciousness. People describe it as flow. Everything connects seamlessly. The boundary between me and the world dissolves. Perhaps if humanity transcends its limits, our new consciousness will not see the universe from a personal angle alone, but as if viewing from the universe's own perspective. An everyday example. When you play in a band, each instrument is distinct, but together, the ensemble creates a symphony. The The violinist doesn't lose their identity, yet their sound now belongs to a greater whole. Post-limit consciousness may be like that. The individual still exists but simultaneously blends into the composition of a larger intelligence. This raises an interesting issue. If consciousness merges, do we still retain individual freedom? Some fear that unity erases the self, turning people into parts of an anonymous collective. I think differently. When the individual unites with a higher whole, we are not lost, we are expanded. Like a drop of water falling into the sea, it is no longer separate. Yet, it does not vanish, it becomes the ocean. To make this more approachable, return to science. In physics, there's emergence. A single ant knows only to follow pheromones. Yet the colony can build nests, find roots, and react with remarkable complexity. From an ant's perspective, colony behavior exceeds its intelligence. Likewise, your and my personal consciousness may be mere grains. When they resonate together, they can form a tier of consciousness beyond what we today can imagine. Personally, I think that if Atlas is testing consciousness, the expected result is not isolated individuals breaking limits, but the whole species upgrading together. That is why it chose Mars, a collective challenge where success or failure depends on coordination, not just lone geniuses. Yet, transcending limits isn't only about technology or biology. It is also spiritual. When a community shares a belief and aims at something beyond itself, it often achieves what individuals never could. The histories of religion, art, and science all prove this. The Apollo program that sent humans to the moon wasn't merely engineering. It was the result of a collective conviction that we can touch the sky. Perhaps transcendent consciousness will be similar. No one attains it alone, but together we will. And then, individual freedom will not be lost. It will transform into collective freedom. A higher form in which we are ourselves and part of a wider intelligence. This poses a deep philosophical question. If consciousness unifies, do we still call it human? Perhaps human fits only the stage before the breakthrough. Afterward, we may need a new term, post-human, or even cosmic consciousness. Rather than fear it, I prefer the positive view. This could be our chance to become a bridge from biology to cosmos, from the finite to the infinite. In our present life, we already taste this on small scales. When you talk with a close friend, sometimes you feel we think as one. In a choir, your voice disappears into the choir, yet is stronger than ever. These suggest that unified consciousness is not loss, but expansion. If this happens on a species-wide scale, Atlas may be only the catalyst. It sets the challenge. Whether we seize the chance to transcend depends on us. In the next section, I want you and me to discuss: if unified consciousness is a prospect, what role is Atlas playing examiner, controller, or a silent teacher? You and I have arrived at a fascinating point. If unified consciousness is truly a possible future, then what role does Atlas play in this story? Is it a cold examiner, standing apart to see whether humans pass or fail? Or is it more like a quiet teacher, arranging conditions so that its students grow on their own? Let's start with the examiner view. In science, many experiments are designed only to collect data, without concern for the subject's feelings. For example, when biologists place mice in a maze, they don't care whether the mice enjoy it. They just want to know how they search, how they react to bait, and how long it takes to learn. If Atlas functions by that logic, then we are merely mice in a cosmic maze. Mars is the maze, Atlas is the bait, and the data is humanity's behavior under crisis. This view is cold, but it makes sense. An intelligent patient enough to prepare for hundreds of thousands of years might not bother with individual worries. It would look only at the big picture, how humanity reacts, how consciousness evolves, whether we are worth further investment. If so, Atlas is a judge, and each of our choices is part of the test. But there's another view, the teacher. A good teacher doesn't hand out ready-made answers. They set up challenges, put the students in difficult spots, and let them struggle. They know that only by finding solutions themselves will students truly grow. Perhaps Atlas is doing just that. not just observing, but creating an environment where we must mature. Mars, in this sense, is a giant group project humanity cannot avoid. I prefer the teacher lens because it fits the way humans actually learn. Do you remember your first driving lesson? The instructor couldn't hold the wheel forever. They let you tremble at the wheel, stall the car, and even get stuck in traffic. Those moments were how you learned. If Atlas wants humanity to grow, then putting us in a situation that is both frightening and full of opportunity may be the most effective lesson. Yet the line between examiner and teacher may lie only in perspective. To a mouse in a maze, the scientist is an examiner. To a student, the teacher is a mentor. Perhaps Atlas is both, gathering data and giving us the conditions to improve. This reminds me of the concept of an open test in education. You're not confined to multiple choice answers, but asked to explain, argue, and show your own reasoning. Atlas may be presenting humanity with such an open test. There isn't one single right answer. What matters is how we choose, how we argue for our existence, and how we prove that human consciousness is unique. I personally believe Atlas does not need us merely to survive. It could have created biological ecosystems without humans. What it seems to want or need is reflective consciousness, the ability to ask, who am I? Do I have freedom? What should I choose? That isn't raw data. It's proof that consciousness can turn inward, elevate itself, and reflect. If that's the case, then Atlas is a great but strict teacher. It doesn't explain. It simply sets the stage for us to discover the lesson. There's an important consequence here. If Atlas is a teacher, we should not expect direct salvation. Just as students cannot expect the teacher to solve the entire math problem, responsibility still lies with us to solve, to learn, and to prove that we are worthy. In the next section, I want you and me to dig deeper. If Atlas truly is a teacher, then what is the great lesson it wants us to grasp? Is it just survival skills, or something deeper, something tied to the very essence of consciousness and freedom? If we truly see Atlas as a teacher rather than merely an examiner, then what lesson is it giving? I believe there are two layers. One on the surface about survival, and another far deeper about consciousness. The surface layer is easy to see. Mars is a technological challenge. We must learn to recreate an environment, atmosphere, water, energy, and closed ecosystems. This is a planetary-scale group project. It forces humanity to cooperate, share knowledge, and break past geopolitical divides. Like a vast classroom, every nation is a student, and all must work together to finish the assignment. But the deeper layer is more daunting and more valuable. This is the lesson of consciousness and freedom, because when faced with an intelligence that can control an entire planet, the question, how do we survive, quickly becomes, how do we survive without losing our essence? That is a philosophical, psychological, and spiritual challenge, not merely a scientific one. Think back to the Middle Ages. When people thought Earth was the center of the universe, consciousness was boxed in. Only when Copernicus and Galileo challenged that belief did humanity open a new age. Perhaps Atlas is creating another Copernicus moment, forcing us to realize that not only Earth, but even our consciousness, may not be the center, only a part of a greater structure. If so, the deeper lesson Atlas wants to teach isn't how to grow crops in Martian soil, but how to grow the seed of freedom in the mind, even when everything seems controlled. It's the ability to keep the question alive. Do I truly choose? As long as we dare to ask that, we are not fully consumed. Let me ground this in daily life. Imagine a routine office job where everything seems programmed, schedules, reports, checklists. Yet within that system, someone still finds a way to innovate, adding a new idea, streamlining a task, or simply listening to a struggling colleague. That small act of freedom inside a closed system is profound. If humanity can keep that spirit alive on a planetary scale, then Mars, even if crafted by Atlas, could still become a place where we plant our own identity. We may live in the aquarium, but still paint it in our own style. That is the power of consciousness. It always creates new meaning, even in controlled settings. I think this is why Atlas neither rules openly nor sends clear messages. It teaches through conditions, not words. A great teacher knows that lectures enter the ears, but experiences carve into the soul. If you've ever learnt to cook, you know, reading the recipe is easy, but only when your hand gets burned by hot oil do you truly remember. Mars may be the hot oil, a direct experience that teaches faster than any lesson. But the lesson doesn't promise safety. Good teachers don't clear every obstacle. They let students stumble, even fail. If Atlas is a teacher, it may accept that humanity could fail, surviving only as maintained biology without free consciousness. But I believe, like any teacher, Atlas hopes its students will surprise it by surpassing expectations. In the next section, I want you and me to ask, if Atlas's lesson is about freedom and consciousness, then what is the reward for passing? Is it merely the right to live on Mars, or something far greater, a permanent step in the evolution of human awareness? If Atlas truly is a teacher, and the lesson it sets for us concerns freedom and consciousness, then a natural question arises. What is the reward for passing this lesson? The surface-level reward is easy to see. A new planet on which to survive. Mars is refashioned with an atmosphere able to hold liquid water and gradually becomes a place where humans can breathe, farm, and build cities. That is, of course, immensely alluring. It's like a class where, if you do your assignments well, you get more lab space, more books, more tools. But is that the greatest reward? I would say, not necessarily. Think of history. When humanity invented fire, the reward wasn't just light or warmth, but the ability to change our entire way of living. Cooking food, gathering around flames, telling stories, and building community. When we invented writing, the reward wasn't merely note-taking, but the ability to preserve memory across generations, laying the foundation for science and culture. These leaps show that the true reward for mastering a great lesson is not the tool itself, but a transformation of consciousness. Applied to Atlas, the real reward may not be a verdant Mars at all, but a new level of consciousness. Once humans prove that we can preserve freedom under absolute control, the consciousness of our species will be changed forever. We will no longer be self-aware only within the bounds of the individual or the nation, but begin to be self-aware on a cosmic scale. Imagine a generation born on Mars. They grow up knowing their homeland is the result of a long cosmic project, that their existence is tied to deep questions about consciousness and freedom. That collective awareness will be entirely different from ours. We who were born and raised on Earth, where nature seems to have given everything ready-made. For the Mars generation, existence is always bound to responsibility, to the question, what are we here to do? From an educational perspective, this is a crucial leap. In a classroom, the true reward for a test is not the grade, but the student's confidence that they have surpassed a limit. A child who solves a difficult math problem successfully, its greatest reward is not the perfect score, but the feeling, I can. For humanity, if we pass Atlas's lesson, the greatest reward will be collective confidence. We can face the cosmos not merely as biological organisms, but as a consciousness capable of standing alongside cosmic intelligence. Personally, I see an even deeper reward, the ability to change how we define ourselves. If before humans identified as a species evolved from apes, then after Atlas, we might define ourselves as a consciousness learning to become a citizen of the cosmos. That is a fundamental shift, from a species surviving on one planet to a species learning to shape its own fate within a larger context. A close analogy, when a teenager leaves home for university, the reward is not just a diploma, it's a change in identity, from a dependent child to an adult who can decide their own life. For humanity, Mars may be our university, and Atlas the entrance exam. If we pass, the reward is not only a new dwelling place, but a maturation of collective consciousness. However, there is a darker side. If we fail, the reward may stop at mere biological survival, a safe but empty fish tank. Like a student who crams to pass, without truly understanding. He may receive a grade, but never truly grows up. This is the risk we must clearly recognize. In the next section, I want you and me to go deeper. If the real reward is a transformation of consciousness, what conditions are needed for humanity to make that leap? Is technology enough, or do we also need a change in how we think, collaborate, and live together? When we talk about reward, there's a very human habit. We often think it comes from outside, a new star, a new technology, or even recognition from a cosmic intelligence. But if Atlas is truly testing us, the reward may not be a gift bestowed, but a capability unlocked within human consciousness itself. Recall moments in your life when you overcame a challenge that seemed impossible. Perhaps it was a grueling exam, a battle with illness, or a personal loss. The reward in those situations wasn't just the result, the diploma, the recovery, or the time that passed after grief, but an inner change. You became someone different, stronger, deeper. That may be the reward Atlas is aiming at, a change in how we understand ourselves. If we still think of ourselves as merely products of nature, a species that appeared by chance on Earth, then perhaps we are not ready. But if we begin to see ourselves as a species capable of choosing meaning, directing existence, and stepping into a role within a vast cosmic project, then we are already halfway there. I have a personal hypothesis. Atlas's reward doesn't lie in Mars or encoded DNA, but in humanity's ability to retain our human qualities while becoming part of a larger system. In other words, if we can enter the universe's network while maintaining creativity, emotion, and the capacity to question, then that is the true victory. Picture a scenario. In the future, Mars becomes humanity's outpost. Children learn in classrooms not only about Newton or Einstein, but also about the Atlas lessons that their ancestors once faced the question, are we free or programmed? And that generation grows up carrying a collective memory that we chose not to abandon freedom. The reward here is not red rock turning to fertile soil, but a new civilization born on the foundation of freedom of consciousness. A historical lesson makes this clearer. When the United States declared independence, the reward was not only a new country, but a change in how people defined themselves, from subjects to citizens. The true reward was a new idea of the human, not territory or resources. In the context of Atlas, the true reward may likewise be a new definition of humanity, from a species surviving on a solitary planet to a consciousness participating in a cosmic community. However, this reward does not automatically come to everyone. It's like a classroom. The same lecture reaches every student, yet some understand deeply, while others only skim. Atlas may be a shared exam, but the reward, the transformation of consciousness, will truly bloom only in those willing to open heart and mind to receive it. That places responsibility on you and me. How do we spread that preparedness? Educationally, perhaps Atlas's real reward is forcing us to change how we teach and learn. Instead of merely transmitting knowledge, we need to encourage analysis, questioning, and especially the capacity to accept uncertainty. Because the reward is not a final answer, but maturity along the path of seeking. Philosophically, the reward may be the chance to escape fear. Most human anxieties revolve around the question, if I can't control it, do I lose meaning? Atlas, by forcing us to face the truth of our smallness before the cosmos, creates an opening for another kind of freedom. Freedom not dependent on control, but on the attitude and response we choose. Personally, I feel that if there is a reward greater than Mars or survival, it is learning to live with uncertainty without losing our humanity. And if humanity achieves this, then Mars is only the beginning. The true reward will be an endless journey where we keep maturing as a part of the universe. In the next section, you and I will consider another question. Does the reward come with greater responsibility? Because if Atlas is opening a door for us to enter a cosmic community, then the true reward may also be the true burden. Every reward comes with responsibility. When a child is given a bicycle, The joy is the freedom to ride, but the responsibility is learning to keep balance. Follow the rules of the road and accept that carelessness brings accidents. For humanity, if Atlas truly gives us the chance to step into the cosmic era, that reward also carries a burden. How to use that opportunity worthily without turning it into a threat to ourselves and to the universe. Remember that Mars is not just a second home. It could become a laboratory for every decision we make. If we build on Mars a society rooted in greed, conflict, and discrimination, then all the old wounds of Earth will repeat, this time in a far more fragile environment. A small ecological or social mistake on Mars may not be forgiven because that planet has no ancient ecosystem to rebalance the consequences. Our first responsibility, in my view, is to build Mars in a spirit distinctly different from Earth's, not to deny the lessons of our homeland, but to apply them more maturely. Earth shows us that unbridled exploitation leads to climate change. So, on Mars, can we learn to use sustainable energy from the outset? Earth gives us a history of wars over resources. So, on Mars, can we begin with global cooperation rather than national competition? A second responsibility is to ensure human consciousness does not dissolve within larger systems. When entering a cosmic network that may have existed for millions of years, we risk becoming just a biological cog. If Atlas is truly part of a deliberate project, then it's understandable that the universe might prefer stability over creativity. Our responsibility is to prove that creativity, emotion, and humaneness have irreplaceable value. This reminds me of the story of Prometheus in Greek myth. He stole fire from the gods to give to humanity, accepting an eternal punishment. That metaphor can apply to us today. When we touch the universe's fire, the technologies and opportunities Atlas brings, the responsibility is to bear the consequences of using it rightly or wrongly. There is no longer room to blame naivety or ignorance. Another responsibility, harder still, is to keep our curiosity from being extinguished by fear. Atlas sets up a situation that many may find overwhelming. Superior technology, plans spanning hundreds of thousands of years, interventions in DNA, and even historical cycles. It's easy to think, if everything has been arranged, then our efforts are meaningless. But our responsibility is not to let that thought take over. Like a student facing a problem that seems unsolvable, we must still try to work it through, because that very process is what creates growth. I believe the greatest responsibility of all is choosing. We can choose safety, accepting the role assigned by the cosmic system, or we can choose risk, pursuing independence, even when the chance of failure is high. Responsibility here does not lie in which option we pick, but in daring to choose and bearing the consequences of that choice. Personally, I feel this is a beautiful burden. Like parents watching their child grow old enough to decide for themselves, they can no longer shelter them, but they understand that the responsibility of freedom is what helps the child mature. The universe may be looking at us with the same gaze. Atlas may be the moment when the teacher withdraws their hand to see where we will go. In the next section, you and I will discuss whether this responsibility might become an interstellar duty, not only to humanity, but to other civilizations undergoing the same test. If we truly are being tested, then humanity's responsibility may extend far beyond our own bounds. It is not only the responsibility to protect human life, but to become an ethical participant in a cosmic community, a community that may include many civilizations and many kinds of consciousness, all watching how we respond to Atlas. Imagine this. When you walk into an international conference, the important thing is not only your nation's interests, but how your conduct affects your people's reputation. Humanity entering a cosmic conference is the same. Our responsibility is not just to exist, but to prove we deserve a place in a larger network. A key point of this responsibility is not repeating the mistakes of the past. History is full of examples where a stronger civilization exploited and imposed itself on a weaker one, leading to injustice, decline, and even extinction. If Atlas truly represents a more advanced intelligence, then the risk of our becoming the ruled is real. But that very fact creates the reverse responsibility. If one day humanity becomes the more advanced party, how will we treat younger civilizations? Interstellar responsibility means learning to set an example. If we cannot manage ourselves without destroying a planet, it is hard to expect the universe to believe we are mature enough to join shared projects. This is no longer idealism, but a condition for survival. A destabilizing civilization will quickly be removed from the big game. Another responsibility, seldom mentioned but crucial, is preserving the diversity of consciousness. Have you noticed that in biology, ecosystems are only healthy when diverse? Similarly, a cosmic ecosystem also needs many kinds of consciousness to thrive. Humanity's responsibility is not merely to survive, but to maintain what makes us unique: artistic creativity, empathy, the ability to question meaning to contribute to the common richness. If we dissolve entirely into the uniformity of a cosmic system, that portion of our responsibility can be considered failed. I have a personal reflection here. Responsibility is not always tied to power. Often, weakness itself creates greater responsibility. A child in a family cannot decide everything, but has the responsibility to learn and to become a good adult. Humanity, in the cosmic family, may be just the child. But precisely for that reason, our responsibility is to learn quickly, to mature in time, and not to do things that burden the whole family with consequences. Another way to see it, Atlas may be an exam not only for us, but for the universe. Humanity's responsibility is not to let this test become proof that diversity of consciousness is a failure. If we collapse, the message sent to other civilizations will be, human consciousness cannot adapt. But if we stand firm, the message will be the opposite. Human consciousness, with all its fragility and emotion, still has irreplaceable value. From an educational standpoint, this recalls the role of students in a class. When a strong student scores high, it can show that the teacher's method works. But when a weaker student rises up, the class's value is proven far more powerfully. Humanity, with all our limitations, has the responsibility to prove that ordinary consciousness can also reach upward. So is interstellar responsibility practical? I think it is. Right now, scientists are speaking more about cosmic ethics. If we find microbes on Mars, we have the responsibility to protect that life, not destroy it for the convenience of settlement. If we detect a signal from a distant civilization, we have the responsibility to consider carefully before replying, because that reply may not only change our fate, but could alter the entire interstellar future. In the next section, I want to delve with you into a tougher question. Do we have the strength to bear this responsibility, or will this very responsibility become a burden that causes humanity to collapse? When we talk about responsibility, we often picture it as a noble burden, a challenge to overcome. But the truth is that people are not always strong enough to carry it. And Atlas, if it really is a cosmic examination, may have been designed to push us to the limits of endurance, where responsibility is no longer an honor, but becomes an enormous pressure. Think of a final year university student. The graduation exam doesn't just test knowledge, it weighs heavily on the psyche. If they fail, the future grows dim. Under such pressure, the responsibility to study easily turns into fear, paralyzing the will. Humanity, facing Atlas, may be in a similar situation. We know we need to prove our worth, but the pressure may become so great that the proving itself grows difficult. A familiar example is climate change. When people realized the responsibility to protect Earth, many felt overwhelmed. They know the planet needs urgent change, but the sheer scale of the work from energy to transportation to agriculture has driven many into climate paralysis. They do nothing, not because they don't care, but because responsibility is so vast, saps their motivation. Could humanity face a state of cosmic paralysis when confronted with Atlas? The difficulty of this pressure lies here. It doesn't only come from outside, from the overpowering presence of cosmic technology, but also from within. We ask ourselves, if everything has been arranged in DNA, do my efforts matter? When belief wavers, responsibility easily becomes an unbearable burden. I have a personal view here. Pressure isn't always bad. In history, many bursts of creativity have arisen from extreme pressure. When Europe was engulfed by plague, vast fear and loss led to changes in medicine, art, and philosophy. When the Cold War placed humanity under the threat of nuclear annihilation, that pressure spurred advances in space science, computing, and arms control treaties. Pressure can crush, but it can also forge. If Atlas truly is testing us, then perhaps pressure itself is the tool to distinguish who will collapse, who will evolve. That sounds harsh, but think of nature. It is not the strongest or the smartest species that survives, but the one that adapts fastest. Atlas may simply be acting as a tester of adaptability by creating unprecedented psychological, cultural, and biological pressure. Still, there is a great danger. Excessive pressure can push people toward the easiest path, abandoning responsibility and handing all decision-making to another power. If we believe we are merely biological instruments in a long-term plan, voices may arise saying, then let them lead. We'll just follow pressure, instead of fostering freedom, would lead to surrender. So how do we keep responsibility from turning into paralyzing pressure? I think the key lies in breaking the burden down. When a community faces disaster, people often say, don't think about saving the whole world, just help the person next to you. Through that division, responsibility becomes feasible. With Atlas, instead of thinking, we must prove humanity worthy of the universe, each person can ask, how will I live to show the value of being human? From an educational perspective, this is a precious lesson. Great responsibility must be transformed into small actions. A student cannot immediately become a scientist, but can start by maintaining the habit of learning, asking questions, and being honest on exams. Humanity is the same. Atlas's reward may lie in small but genuine acts, multiplied into shared value. In the next section, you and I will discuss a scenario full of risk, yet full of hope. Could this immense pressure become the catalyst for an explosion of consciousness, a spiritual revolution powerful enough to propel humanity beyond its own limits? We have spoken about how responsibility can turn into pressure, sometimes paralyzing people. But conversely, there are times when pressure becomes a catalyst, driving extraordinary change. You and I have both seen this in everyday life. Someone who usually procrastinates suddenly bursts with energy when the deadline nears, finishing in a few hours what they couldn't do in a week. That psychology can scale up to all of humanity. If Atlas is truly part of a cosmic testing script, then perhaps pressure itself is the paradoxical gift we've been given. Immense pressure can push us to discover ways of thinking and acting that previously seemed impossible. Recall the story of the Apollo astronauts. When humans first set foot on the moon, the entire mission was completed in less than a decade, a vanishingly short span relative to the complexity of the technologies involved. How could it be so fast? Because there was pressure. The pressure of the Cold War, the pressure of national pride, the pressure of a world watching every step. Enormous pressure turned into a driver for unprecedented creativity. In the context of Atlas, the question is, can we transform today's pressure into a new Apollo moment? But this time, not for one nation, for all humankind. I think there are two paths. The first is deep cooperation. When pressure becomes too great for an individual or a nation, the only way is to share it. It is like a family. When one person bears all the financial worries, pressure can crush them. But if the whole household discusses, shares, and shoulders the load together, the burden grows much lighter. With Atlas, international cooperation could be the key. The second path is a revolution of consciousness. This is not a technological change, but a change in how we perceive ourselves. If we see ourselves merely as small creatures under immense pressure, that pressure will crush us. But if we believe that this very pressure is an invitation to uncover new potential, everything changes. It's like metallurgy. An iron bar becomes steel only under extreme heat. Humanity, perhaps, need such a furnace of spirit to transform from an old consciousness into a new one. From an educational standpoint, this is a golden opportunity. A young generation can be nurtured not only with job skills, but with the capacity to endure and transmute pressure. In class, instead of just teaching how to solve an equation, a teacher can tell how similar equations were used to track objects like Atlas. This turns mathematics from a burden into part of humanity's journey. When responsibility is tied to a grand story, it grows lighter and becomes a source of pride. Let me share a personal thought here. Many fear that pressure will render people callous, selfish, or resigned. But I believe in the human capacity to turn pressure into an art of living. Some of history's greatest music was born in the hardest times. The deepest philosophies, from Buddhism to Stoicism, arose when people faced suffering. Perhaps Atlas, with its enormous pressure, will open a new era for art, philosophy, and science. Of course, nothing is guaranteed. Pressure can lift us or drag us down. What decides this is our choice. Do we view it as a sentence or as an opportunity? On a personal level, you and I can begin in small ways. Don't let fear paralyze us. See it as a reminder that we are alive and still have a chance to change. In the next section, we will go one step further. Assuming humanity truly accepts this pressure, cooperates globally, and begins a revolution of consciousness, what might the final outcome be? Could it be the birth of a new civilization, not merely surviving Atlas, but ignited by Atlas to evolve to an entirely different level? As we reach the closing passages of this journey, you and I can clearly feel that every question about Atlas no longer revolves around what it is, but more importantly, who we will become when faced with it. There's a subtle yet crucial difference here. Instead of treating Atlas as the center, we begin to see ourselves as the focus of the cosmic test. Imagine standing before a mirror in the morning. At first, we just check our hair, the wrinkles, or our outfit. But if we look longer, we might start to ask, how will the person in this mirror live today? How will I act to be worthy of the life I've already lived? Atlas is much like a colossal cosmic mirror. It does not answer. It only reflects what we're thinking, feeling, and choosing. Throughout this script, we've mentioned many elements. DNA that may carry pre-installed programming, repeating historical cycles, subtle control, or fragile freedom. But when everything is pieced together, what appears most clearly is this. We are at a decisive fork in the road, a final turning point. If you notice, human history has always had such moments. When we abandoned hunting and gathering to enter agriculture, that was a fork. When we moved from sail to steam, that was a fork. And now, faced with Atlas, we stand before a fork of cosmic scale. Either advance into a civilization mature enough to cooperate with an extraterrestrial intelligence, or with a previous version of ourselves, or repeat the cycle of dependency and accept the role of an instrument. I want to pause here to share a personal thought. I believe the difference between failure and success does not lie in technology, but in how we define ourselves. If we see ourselves merely as passengers on a cosmic ship piloted by someone else, we'll behave like passengers sitting still, waiting. But if we see ourselves as crew, then even if this ship was designed by a mysterious hand, we can still take part, still make choices, and influence the voyage. This is precisely where the educational element becomes pivotal. Every history lesson, every math formula, every science story, if placed in this grand context, can help the next generation recognize that knowledge isn't just for exams. It's a tool for dialogue with the universe. A child who knows they're learning math not just to solve homework, but to read the language of Atlas, will study with an entirely different spirit. Likewise, every adult can look back at their daily work, a doctor saving a patient, an engineer designing roads and bridges, a farmer planting another crop. All of these, when tied into the shared story, become proof that humans are not merely programmed beings, they are meaning makers. It is precisely the act of creating meaning that is the strongest signal sent to the universe. And perhaps this is the most important lesson from Atlas. Not power, not cold intellect, but the capacity to create new meaning is the measure of a civilization's maturity. In the next section, the final one, I will close this journey with you. We'll look back at everything, from chilling hypotheses to glimmers of hope, and then distill a simple yet powerful invitation for the future. Be ready, because it's not just an ending, it's the opening line of a new chapter. You and I have traveled a long road, from when Atlas was just a faint speck in the sky to when it became a mirror reflecting the entire human story. We asked, is it merely an insensate chunk of ice and rock, or a vast project incubated for hundreds of thousands of years? But deeper still, what matters is not the nature of Atlas, but humanity's response to it. If Atlas truly is a test, then it does not assess our technological cleverness, but our will and spirit. It places us before a paradox. All signs suggest the future was written in advance in DNA, in repeating cycles, in ancient grand designs. Yet, at the same time, it grants us the chance to say, no, I can still choose. I can still create my own meaning. Throughout this conversation, I've often shared the view that pressure itself is the opportunity. This might be the moment humanity awakens, just as when people first grasped a firestone, or first looked up at the sky and decided to track the stars. Atlas is not just an interstellar visitor, it's a reminder that the universe hasn't forgotten us. It is inviting, testing, and also offering a chance. This brings us to the final choice, not a choice about technology, nor about political power, but about a way of living. Will we accept the role of an instrument in a pre-written script, or treat this as an invitation to become authors of the next chapter in cosmic history? If you ask me, I choose to believe that humans can transcend programming, because history shows that, no matter how often we are limited, we still find ways to rise. No one thought hunters would build cities. No one believed walkers would fly beyond the atmosphere. So why think that today, before Atlas, we cannot surpass ourselves? The final truth may remain unclear. Atlas might simply depart, leaving a streak of light and vanishing into darkness. But that does not erase the meaning, because even if Atlas is nothing more than a lifeless mass, the questions it stirs within us are enough to transform a civilization. Mystery, unease, and curiosity together become the engine for humanity's self-reflection. And you see, we've completed a great circle. From early fear, through doubtful hypotheses, to hope and resolve. The end of this story is in fact the beginning of another, the story of you, of me, and of what we will do after this screen goes dark. So I have an invitation for you. If this journey with Atlas has touched your thoughts, let me know by hitting like and subscribing. Not just to support the channel, but so we can continue building a community of people who dare to ask big questions and think beyond the borders of a single lifetime. Share this video with someone, maybe a friend who loves stargazing, a loved one anxious about the future, or someone who simply needs a reason to look up at the sky. And don't forget to comment below. If you had to choose, would you accept safety in a pre-written script, or venture forth to write the future yourself? Your answer is not just feedback to me. It is part of humanity's data, something the universe may be watching, evaluating, and awaiting. Because who knows, somewhere out there, someone may also be wondering, what will humans choose when they stand before Atlas? The universe is silent, but that silence is not empty. It is a pause for us to fill with our own choices. And as Mars slowly changes color, as Atlas still leaves its mark on the orbit, that question is no longer distant. It is right here in each small decision we make. You can choose indifference, you can choose fear, or you can choose curiosity, courage, and stepping together into a new chapter. Atlas has offered this chance, and the rest is up to us. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. If you believe this story has value, please subscribe, share, and let's keep the flame of curiosity burning. See you in the next video, where we'll continue to decode the mysteries the universe has set aside for humanity.